why are you running for Congress?
So my name is Kurt Wilson, and Mr. Abrams and Mr. Gray and Mr. Hill just correctly identified the same problems. So why am I running? I'm running because I'm an ordinary citizen, like most of you. I'm an ordinary citizen that's never had any interest in politics in terms of being an elected political official. But here's the thing. The federal government's broken, and it's getting worse. And although we have lots of good people with lots of good ideals who want to do the right thing, nothing really changes. So first and foremost, I'm running to get a constitutional amendment for term limits, because that's the first thing that's going to fix Washington, D.C. Thank you very much.
Had you been a member of the House, and if it were brought up for a vote, how would you have voted and why?
So I did bring one audiovisual aid for this debate, and only one. I promise you there's no others. And what I have in front of me is H.R. 1628. And this is the bill that was proposed by Congress, by the Republicans this week, for the replacement of Obamacare. But here's the problem. The mandate was clear in 2010. It was clear in 2014. And I dare say it was clear in 2016. The first order of business for the Republican Congress was to repeal Obamacare. Washington came up with this neat little trick that said, let's repeal and replace, because they didn't want to lose votes. So once again, we fall into the trick of falling into politics. The first mandate was to repeal it. Healthcare is broken, not health insurance. There are a lot of issues that we'll talk about hopefully in this debate in relation to healthcare. But my vote would have been absolutely no. Thank you.
Do you believe Republicans can afford to move on to other priorities before this longtime campaign pledge is met?
So one of the things that I appreciate about Donald Trump as our president is that, by the way, you're not going to see me say I'm behind the president or not behind the president, because I'm running to be your congressional representative. I'm not running to be Donald Trump's ally or not ally. I'm running to be your conservative voice in the 6th District. But one of the things that I really appreciate about Donald Trump is that I think he's authentic. And I think he's also smart. And I think he recognizes that Obamacare is going to implode. So I don't think it's the next order of business is the short answer to the question. There are a lot of very, very important pieces of business in my mind. The first thing we need to deal with as a country is reversing the $20 trillion of national debt, which means we have to balance the budget with a surplus, which means we're fixed to talk about tax reform. Let's talk about serious tax reform and repeal the 16th Amendment and replace it with a flat tax or fair tax. That should be the next order of business before the Congress. Thank you.
So what is the right way for Congress to handle Medicaid, both in the Obamacare expansion and the program more generally going forward?
One of the things, being not a politician, is I have the freedom to say the things that I truly believe and to speak the way I believe that normal citizens speak. So the first thing I'm going to address is Medicaid itself. Because if you're going to reverse the $20 trillion of national debt and actually balance the budget with a surplus, you have to attack Medicaid and Medicare. Those programs are 25%. They're 25% of the federal budget currently. And on their trajectory, ultimately, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security will bankrupt our country. And can you imagine from a business perspective, having a program that's 52 years old and not adjusting it, not changing it, not making distinctions on it to make it work better? That's the case with Medicaid. So once again, when we talk about the debate currently, we're talking about marginalizing, doing small things rather than doing radical things, which are the things we really have to do as a people. We have to attack Medicaid in total. We have to take Medicare in total. Those programs have to be devolved. It's not just about block grants to the state. It's about changing the programs radically. Thank you. Yeah, just to stay on the healthcare debate, for example, so just imagine, and I like Bob's idea about car insurance. We've talked about that a lot from his free market perspective. But the real problem with healthcare is that you have to imagine a business. I'm in the fast food business. So you imagine if you came to one of my restaurants and bought a chicken sandwich, right? But every time you bought that chicken sandwich, you had to have insurance to specifically cover that transaction. And on top of that, some of that money had to come from the federal government. What would happen to the business model? It would gigantically increase in cost and complexity. That's the problem with healthcare today.
If elected, would you plan to join the House Freedom Caucus?
Let's be clear for a second. I think it's always interesting how we have to find somebody to blame. Blame in our life, blame in politics. It's the blame game. It goes round and round, and somehow the Freedom Caucus is this week's blame team. Next week it'll be somebody else. Paul Ryan is this week's blame team. The reality is this bill was Obamacare light. It was a bad piece of legislation. It shouldn't have been brought in front. It should not have even been considered. We weren't ready. It was a bad idea. Whether you were a moderate, a conservative, or a liberal in terms of being a Republican, you should have opposed this bill. It was a bad piece of legislation. We keep marginalizing ourselves as Republicans by following the lead of Democrats rather than saying what we're really for. And we're going to change health care. We have to change health care dramatically, not by doing parlance with the Democrats and saying, let's do Obamacare light. So God bless the Freedom Caucus. The answer to the question is, though, no, I would not join the Freedom Caucus. It's going to be your representative from the 6th Congressional District. Thank you.
Which areas of the tax code should lawmakers tackle first? And do you favor a comprehensive reform package or more piecemeal approach?
I don't know if there's anybody in this room that feels like they're not taxed enough. If you do, please stand up and yell hooray. So let's remember, we're conservatives. And let's remember what we're following. So the current debate is talking about changing the current tax system from 7 brackets to 3. It's following a progressive tax system. It's the 16th Amendment of the United States. It was passed in 1913. It's a progressive tax system. It's a bad tax system. That when we passed that 16th Amendment in 1913, it was 400 pages long. Today, it's 76,000 pages long. It's an onerous tax code. It has to be not reformed. It has to be replaced. As I say, with a flat tax or a fair tax, flat or fair, I don't care. They both deserve general, robust debate. Both have great merit. But the reality as conservatives is that we need to quit chasing the dog of the current tax system, and we need to repeal the 16th Amendment and replace it with a real tax system. Thank you.
Do you see the border adjustment tax as good for businesses, bad for consumers, or somewhere in between?
So, David, I'm one of those chicken guys. I don't remember that special lobby deal, but... So, the border adjustment tax... Well, probably do. So the border adjustment tax, another great example of a shiny object thrown out there to seduce us and make us get in favor of something. Why are we as Republicans, why are we as conservatives continuing to follow the same lines that the Democrats, the progressive tax system puts in front of us? What we really need to do, again, is repeal the tax system, i.e. the 16th Amendment, and replace it with a flat tax or a fair tax. We keep a border adjustment tax, you name the tax. It's always some kind of seductive item that's thrown out there as us to as citizens from Washington, D.C., don't care what party's in power, to seduce us to follow the shiny object. Stop following the shiny objects. We as conservatives don't believe in that. We know what we really need to stimulate the economy and to take care of our tax burden long term is repeal the 16th Amendment. I am glad Bob Gray said that, because that's exactly what's wrong with politics. It's about being practical rather than following our lines of beliefs. So we're sucked into a terrible tax system. And yet the American people, we as conservatives, and a majority of people believe like we do. So we keep following Washington, D.C.'s lead rather than following the lead of the people, the way it was intended from the framers. We need to repeal the 16th Amendment. It's not practical. It's the right thing to do.
Will you promise to hold town hall meetings?
So, by the way, my name is Kurt Wilson, so I know it's easy to forget, so I'm going to keep saying it. The town hall meetings, exactly. So what have we created in our political system today? We've created a house of lords and ladies. That's why town hall meetings are so scary. I call it the QT test, the quick trip test. It's one of the things I like about Donald Trump, because I think you could take Donald Trump and drop him off at a quick trip here in Marietta, Georgia, and you could leave his handlers away, and you could come back in an hour, and Donald would be just fine because he'd be engaged with regular folks because he's authentic. But I think so many folks in Washington, D.C. are not authentic. It's about their political ambition. So you know what? A town hall scares the heck out of them because you got to go engage with people who disagree with you. You got to go engage with people who don't like what you're saying. You've got to go be authentic and tell them the truth. The short answer to the question is absolutely. I'll be your representative. Of course I'll do town halls in an engaging and ongoing manner. Yes, sir.
So why would term limits not have the perverse effect of empowering lobbyists and bureaucrats even more than today?
This is really the most pivotal issue for us as the American people. Bob's right when he references the founders, but the spirited debate was between Madison and Hamilton. And when they sold the Constitution for the ratification, went around the country, they wrote 85 essays called the Federalist Papers. And one thing that's clear from the Federalist Papers that both Hamilton and Madison did not envision was a ruling political class. And so I ask you the very simple question. This is the reason I'm running. Can you imagine on the track we're getting? 25 years ago, if you'd asked me about term limits, I would have said I was ambivalent. But 25 years of lifetime experience in business has taught me the system's broken. And yes, bureaucrats are part of the problem. Yes, that's why we have to derail and defund the federal bureaucracy. But it first starts with we have got to change Washington, D.C. We've got to make the government and our representatives accountable to us. That happens first and foremost with a constitutional amendment on term limits. It's pretty simple. So the process is absolutely reversed, Bob, because the first thing has to start is you have to start with the elected officials. That's what's broken. Everybody knows it's broken. Of course the bureaucracy is out of control. Why is the bureaucracy out of control? Because there's one authority that has the authority to deal with the bureaucracy. It's Congress. And Congress won't do it. And the only way we change that is to get normal, ordinary citizens back into the business of politics who want to be servant leaders, get their job done, and get back home. The only way to take care of the bureaucracy is with a constitutional amendment for term limits.
Do you support building the wall on the southern border with Mexico? Hand up if you do. Okay. Now, leave them up if you would be willing, as a member of Congress, to appropriate the necessary funds to pay for the wall. Okay, so now I'd like you to explain those votes you just cast.
First of all, thank God for Donald Trump raising the issue a year and a half ago, because this issue was not on the national platform. And so Donald Trump raised this issue and made it a national issue and made it of national prominence, and that's why we're talking about it. Because 18 months ago, there was no one talking about this issue. So thank God for Donald Trump doing that. That's the first piece. The second piece is probably most of us in this room go to church, and we probably have, my guess is you probably have some illegal immigrants in your church. And that's the reason I want to bring this up. Because there's some good people that are illegal immigrants. The problem is they're illegal, right? And so I've had some breakfast with some of those illegal immigrants, asking their perspective, because I expect them to be repatriated back to Mexico. In most cases, that's the country of origin for most of them. And so it's interesting what they say to me. They actually say to me, yes, we do need the wall because you got to stop the flow. I don't have enough time to finish this. So the other part of that is that I do believe, I've got to stop, sorry.
One of the main factors driving the population of illegal immigrants is visa overstays. People who come here legally but remain in the U.S. after they are supposed to have left. So what measures would you support to address this part of the problem?
This is another great example of big government failure. Because most of you probably already know that technology exists today through simple geofencing. Basically, anybody that's using a phone in this room, you're already identified, the sites you're going to, the places you're visiting, it's already known. So think about how simplistic this issue is from a technology perspective. Yet, we don't address it. Why? Because we have an unresponsive big government that continues to fail us and spend a lot of money. Again, stay macro on these issues. It's easy to follow the shiny objects. It's another shiny object issue. It's another poor result from a big government that doesn't serve its people.
Some people argue that in favor of strengthening people's ability to immigrate legally while clamping down on illegal immigration, and others say we need to reduce legal immigration from its current levels. So which is your position and why?
Obviously, we have a history of controlling immigration based upon the needs of the United States. One of the things about legal immigration that the United States uses to its advantage today is to bring technology labor into the United States that we need throughout the world. That's a practical reality. It's one of the reasons we have legal immigration in the numbers that we have it today. It's because of practical reasons. We are bringing people who want to become United States citizens and who want to become fully Americanized, which is part of the process. But we're also using the skill sets they're having to help continue furthering our economy in a very positive way. So that makes sense based upon the needs of what we need at times in legal immigration. So, yes.
What, if anything, do you think you would do in Congress to respond to that crisis that in a lot of parts of America, people becoming addicted to painkillers and then moving on in some cases to things like heroin?
I think that Mr. Abrams brings up an interesting point because with all due respect to Mr. Gray, does anybody really believe that law enforcement today is not going after the dealers and being effective? With all due respect to Judson Hill, does anybody really believe that we're not enforcing RX prescriptions on the doctor level? Those are not the real issues with opiates. Those are not the real issues with opiates. It's a cultural issue. And Mr. Abrams deals with it from the standpoint of, look, the federal government is not in the business of solving every problem, particularly when they're cultural problems. The problem is the government's too big. The problem is that we become more cynical as a people because the government's too big and we're unable to reduce it in size to begin to solve problems at the local level. This is not a discussion we should have at the federal level. It's a discussion we should have at the local level. Thank you.
Criminal justice reform is something we've seen multiple years here in Georgia. Let's delve into that.
Bob raised an interesting point in the very early in the debate, which I think is worth mentioning on this debate. He said, so what is the end game? And the end game for me is having 4 daughters and a wife, is that they can travel anywhere in safety. And so you really don't have freedom, right, unless your wife, your children, or you can go wherever you want to in the United States without fear of having some kind of crime perpetrated against you. And one of the challenges is that since the early 1990s, we've spent a lot of money, we've changed a lot of laws to basically toughen up our criminal justice system, and to some success. But there again, I tell you, it's also a cultural issue. It's more about, again, the big government's more in the way than it is really in the solution business. One other piece about this, that's why the Second Amendment's important. It's important for people to be able to carry firearms for their own personal protection. Thank you.
Do you think Congress should change the classification so research can be done? And do you agree with President Trump's position that leaves that sort of policy up to the states?
One of my basic beliefs, again, is in limited government. And so if the people, what I believe is I want to continue to devolve as many government decisions as possible about how people live with one another on most issues. For example, if the people in Spokane, Washington think it's in their infinite wisdom to legalize marijuana, and I, by the way, am completely opposed to it, but I do believe that the people of Spokane, Washington should be able to make that decision. If the people in Woodstock, Georgia, don't think that's such a good idea, I believe they should be able to say in their respective area, I'm not in favor of that. Because I think it's important because one of the ways that the framers intended us to govern. They had intended us to govern at the local level, to make decisions that were important to us at a local level. And by the way, I agree with President Trump on one of the things on this issue that we talk about is everybody knows the buzzword. Medical marijuana is a gateway to legalizing marijuana. It's one of those slippery little arguments. Thank you.
Most political prognosticators expect a runoff in this race between a Republican and the leading Democrat in the race, John Ossoff. Will you commit today to supporting the Republican in the runoff, even if it's not you?
Well, since it's going to be me, it's an easy yes.
We're going to move on to our closing statements. You got 1 minute, just like on the answers to the questions, and we will begin with Kurt Wilson.
Well, I'm sure like a lot of the other candidates, by the way, good job, gentlemen. Great to be with you. And thanks for the Georgia GOP 6th District having this. My only regret is that we don't have all 11 Republican candidates up here. Because all voices, they all qualified as Republican candidates. It's a big deal. They all spent $5,220. We're the party of ideals, and ideals need to be expressed by every candidate. So, simple closing here. I thought all of us could go for hours in reality, but you know, the simple question, the reason I'm running is, do you believe that the federal government is not involved in your life too much? Do you believe that the federal government, do you believe that you're not taxed enough? Do you believe that Washington, D.C. is doing a great job in your life and that politicians up there are not interested in political ambition, but they're interested simply in service? The answer is no, right? And so it's time to vote for citizen legislatures. That's why I'm running. My name's Kurt Wilson, and I hope I get your support on April 18th. Thank you, and God bless.
I'm Kurt Wilson, and I approve this message.